So this is where we ended up in the last part, so part 1, and I'm going to continue forward with this. So we could put some color down for the glass, however that's going to be powered through the transmission color within Maya, so it's probably not necessary. But we can include some dirt and stuff like that. So I'm going to go to the bottle group that I made in the part 1 with the masking, and let's go with, so we want some dirt in there, and I've added the baked maps. So within this group I can add a geo channel node, or if you have baked within Mari, created an ambient occlusion, you would go to the ambient occlusion tab. So I hit geo channel, and let's take a look at what the ambient occlusion is giving us. So there's not really much going on there. Could use it though for, we see this the shadow coming down there. So if I added an adjustment layer stack, adjustment stack, let's go brightness lookup. So this is just adding the visual adjustments area here. So I'm just going to fiddle with this until I get something a bit more interesting. Let's see if we could push that ambient occlusion further back. It is a bit grainy, so that's a slight problem. But I think something like that would be good enough for some subtle dirt. Well, maybe not so subtle on this higher bit, but we're probably going to see it from like this far back, so we can push it a bit more. That's why it doesn't really matter that I wasn't as delicate with the top bit there. Cool, so we've got that. And now this, I'm going to just call this AO mask. So this will be the mask for the dirt. So there's a few ways that I could create the dirt. I could just pop color down. So, or yeah, I could create a procedural color. So I could use a procedural node, or I could get a texture. So I did download a texture this morning. So I'm gonna just quickly find that and pop that into my textures folder. So it's just from textures.com, and it's just a 1K dirt image. The reason for using a picture is just because there'll be a lot greater variety of color information. So when I start overlaying, then it'll be more interesting. It's a more realistic way of doing it. So if you just use a lot of flat colors, then you'll just end up with more a cartoony type look. Cool. Okay, so this is the texture here. So there's just some mud. It's probably one of the first one that pops up on textures.com. It's just a 1K by 1K, so that's good. So let's pop it in down here into the layers, and we just want it to tile, so we'll go to procedural, no, yeah, it's procedural pattern tiled. God damn it, I hit sphere. So I'm just gonna find that again, pattern tiled, and then remove the one that I made by mistake. And I'll drag the mud into that. Okay, so by default that looks pretty horrendous. So I'm just going to tile that in the UV area. So I'm just guessing, I'm just putting in 15, seeing how it looks. So it's very bright as well. So I'm imagining in the corners it would be a lot darker. So then I would add, I'm going to rename this to be mud texture, and I'm going to color correct it, so I might do other things to it. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer stack. I'll just pick a levels, I'm just going to bring down the mid. It might, as I do this, it might add in a lot more saturation, so I might, oh no, actually I'm pushing the mid up, and so as it's getting darker, it is looking quite saturated, but we're only going to see a fraction of this. I just want it to be similar to this other dirt that I used, the fractal type look. So there we go, I've added that, and now what I need to do is I'm going to copy, I'm going to hide this, get rid of that, copy this AO mask, so that's just the ambient occlusion that's been color corrected a bit. I'm going to hide it, and on my mud underscore texture I'm going to add I'm going to add the adjustment layer stack, the mask adjustment layer. Actually, what is it called? Mask. It must be a mask stack or something. Yeah, okay. So in that, I'm going to pull this over there. I'm going to pin it so it doesn't fly away. It creates an empty layer by default. God damn it. Didn't copy that across. So I'm just gonna copy and paste the ambient occlusion mask again. Oh, I think it's not copying because it's not visible. So copy. Oh, it did go in there. Cool. Sweet. Great. Okay, so we can see it's having some sort of effect. This layer that was made by default, I'm going to just remove. It's just an empty layer, pretty much. Okay, so I can so I have this adjustment layer stack on this ambient occlusion. I put in the brightness lookup. So this is a lot of layers within layers basically, so it might look more confusing. So I need to invert this as well. So it's gonna add an adjustment and invert it. Cool. And now the reason we have this ambient occlusion look there is because the ambient occlusion is It's in our visible layers, so it's not just being used as a mask, so I just need to delete that one. Great. So this is the result we have. So we've got that tiled texture of mud, and then it's being used, it's being masked by an inverted ambient occlusion. So we get this slight fade off there, and then we've also got this other fade off for the rings, but they're being done separately. So this could all just be overlaid on its own, but I've divided my layers up, so I'm working on each separate bit. So I could just apply a dirt overlay to all the different bits, but I want to control and play with each different area separately. So it depends how you want to work. If you just want quick dirt, you could just get the tileable texture and then multiply, maybe invert it, then multiply the ambient occlusion over everything. So we have a bit of dirt there. I'm going to look at the bottom. So my ambient occlusion was just baked with this object on its own, so there is no shadowing at the bottom. So if I had kept a polygon plane at the bottom, then I would have got some nice shadowing at the bottom. So if I want to add some dirt there, I'll probably just have to do it manually. So I could just paint in my mask area. Is this the mask stack? Yeah. So I think in this instance I'm going to do that. So a bit of manual painting. So I'll create a new paint layer within this mask. I'm going to load the ortho and UV view just so I can see where it's painting for the bottom. So the bottom bit is quite low res. It's one of these bits. I know one bit should be the inner bottom and one is the outer bottom. Stop doing that. Jesus. These snapping menus. Okay. So let's go to, so I've got the paintbrush selected on the left hand side, and gonna go to shelf, pick the brush, hard surface brush. I'm just gonna go with the spec, whatever this one's called, spec brush. And in the tool properties, I can just double check that the rotation, I can check my pen pressures are on or off, and I think it's mainly just the opacity one, so I could change the flow and the rotation. Yeah, that's kept the same as I changed it yesterday. It's great. So I'm just going to start painting and see how that turns out. Occasionally my tablet will disconnect, so sometimes I get opacity and sometimes I do not. So at the moment I'm getting nothing. That's because I'm painting black in a mask. Cool, look at that, it's pretty good. So do I have pen pressure? No. So I'm just going to change that. So tool properties, and let's turn on the flow. So we get in the scratch pads an example, and you can scribble out things. So if you want to test the brush, it's a pretty cool function. So you can turn these on and it'll give you an estimated look of how it's going to be. Great. So now I can just softly paint this. I do want it to be a bit faded because, as you can see at the bottom, you can very clearly tell it's literally a picture of dirt that I found online. So I don't really want that. So I'm just flicking to the black brush. So I want to fade it a bit. And we can change the opacity at the top. You can see as I move between windows, I have auto bake on, but that will only happen, it will only auto bake when you try and move or do something, when you try and move around the model. Otherwise, if you paint, as I said in part 1, it's kind of like painting onto a clear piece of glass, and then you're painting and then projecting onto what is behind it. So if you change the auto bake option, so it's auto bake by default, and you can change that somewhere. Where is it? Should be in the paint buffer options, painting. Yeah, so it's in the painting tab. So we have this bake behavior. So there's auto bake and clear or manual. So if you set it to manual, then not only will you have to press B whenever you're happy, but then you will have to clear what is on this invisible glass you've just painted. That's why you also have these modes up here for clear, but just keeping it on the auto bake might be a better option. So you can actually see how low res that UV area at the bottom is, because you can see how pixelated it is compared to the UV space of the outer glass. So I think that's fine. I've painted it a bit. See from the side, I could probably push that a bit further out, so I'm going to add a little bit more. Just painting very faintly. So you can see I was doing an angle, so we're getting a slight bit of stretching. So I just keep flicking back to painting black, because we are painting the mask, so it's just going to be reading the black and white value of that. I'm pressing close bracket to increase the size of this paintbrush. Sometimes it's not picking up the pen pressure, so I just have to deal with that. So I'm just tapping around now because I've painted fairly even thin cone, and then I want this random breakup. So I'm just stamping it. Cool, and let's take a look how that looks. So we've got a bit of dirt poking around the edges in a fairly plausible way, because we won't see that bottom completely, but it will be refracted, so we'll see it slightly. And then from a side view, I can press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and get all the different views. So this is flat on, and we can see a bit of the dirt down there. So now I could continue to paint a bit more dirt. I can push these bits where the rings are. So if we just imagine that there was a bit of grime coming down, or we could in fact use a decal, so I could project an image on, such as this. So this is a bit more sort of mossy looking almost. I don't think it's moss, it's just something dripping down from a metal container. But because I'm painting the mask for the mud, this projection won't be applicable right now. So I'm just going to paint a bit more. So ideally with this random rotation, it's breaking up the shape of this paintbrush because it is a fairly uniform square. So I'm just carefully stamping and then I'll rotate round. I'm not even pushing that hard, so Mari does not like my tablet. Just getting these perfect stamps. Cool, that's not to now, I'm just tapping away. So I'm just painting it in the top area because I'm imagining that whatever grime is there would more, like, I mean, on the rings we already have some grime on the top bit, which is fairly uniform because it is just being powered by the ambient occlusion. But yeah, I'm just adding dirt on the lower bits, so I'll just keep doing that and go around. So I'm just softly painting out very lightly with my tablet. So if you don't have a tablet, just change the opacity at the top to something like 0.3. And then after you've done that, then you can change your brush color to be black, and then you can just stamp, you know, bring it back. So stamp back. You can press B to bake as well while you're doing this, although as I said before, if it's got the auto bake, then that's not a worry. I'm going to change the overall opacity because this is just very intense. It's so obvious. You know, sometimes when I'm stamping, it's just giving such a harsh result. So you can see on this bottom bit, I just want to break up this line. So as you're doing this, you should probably have reference up, because this is all based on reality. Ah, so there's a problem there with the UVs. It's interesting. Let's take a look. So looking in the UV view, I can see that looks like in the baking process, a face of an object has probably been stretched across, although I did UV this, so I'm not sure why that's happened, but that result is coming from the ambient occlusion, because I believe all the curvature, whatever one I used to do this. So because I'm not going to go back and rebake, I could just paint manually to try and blend this all in. But that's interesting. I'm not sure why that occurred, because the whatever face was up there was certainly not attached to there, because they're two separate objects. Okay, so I'll bake that, and then then start stamping back. But so I'm putting the opacity to 0.3 just because I don't think I might need to update the driver for this tablet. Or it could be Windows Ink. If anyone's texture painting on a Windows machine and you're using, I know Windows Ink, you need it turned on for pen pressure to work in Photoshop. But if you want to be able to use your tablet much like a standard mouse, then you have to turn Windows Ink off, or you won't be able to drag things. It's pretty stupid, really. So I'm just going to clean up a little bit more. Cool. Okay, so we've got some dirt. Let's see how it looks from distance. I'll press 1 on the keyboard to straighten up this view. Doesn't look too bad. I think we can add some scratches and things like that, or some general grime over the bottle, but it's going to be a bit more subtle than what we have below. Okay, so moving forward with the bottle, I think what I'm going to do is add a bit more grime to the sides. So with the glass, I know that it's more going to be the roughness, or possibly the extra roughness input within Arnold, that's going to give this a more realistic look. So I don't actually have the reference up, but I did have a reference picture online. So for the moment, I'm just going to get rid of these tabs. So at the moment, it's just the roughness texture. Let's take a look at this. I downloaded this decal. So it looks a bit like mold. So I'm going to create a new layer. And I'm just going to do this bit manually. Let's change the view to perspective. Actually, now I'll project this into this view. I'm going to put this dirty look underneath the mud. And so I believe that this is the outside, this UV area, and this is the interior. So I should probably add some mold, so I can use this one on the inside. So you kind of have to use your imagination a little bit. So I'm just gonna project so I can project that on, and then I'll probably pull it back. So I'll use my noisy brush. Actually, for painting on, it probably doesn't really matter. We've already got transparency. This is a 8-bit PNG from textures.com. So I'm just going to scribble that out. And let's rotate. So I'm holding Control to rotate, Shift to move it around, Control and Shift to scale it. And then it's Alt and middle mouse to move. So this line here is the top band. So I'm just going to add a little bit more crap going up there. So this will be a bit more like dust on the bottle. So I've got to be careful where I'm painting it because we'll have the seams on the side, so that'll be quite obvious where this ends. Cool. Just want some more faint dirt, dust, in fact. Okay. I think that'll do. It's looking very JPEG-y on the left-hand side. So this is a 4K texture, but this area is only taking up about... So whenever I'm texturing, I always think, okay, so this is 4K. So if we split that into quarters, then you've got about 1K there and 1K here. So this actual texture area there is probably like... It's probably... oh, I've got stretching now. Okay, that's because this has been unfolded and then optimized within Maya. Okay, so that's fine, and then I'm going to trim it back. So let's rename this layer to dust. Actually, I changed my mind about the layering. Dust should be on top of the mud. So if we think about what this bottle was used for, could have been placed around and then picked up the dirt, and then as it's been sat somewhere for a long time, then it gets dust accumulation. So I could use a mask to bring this back, or I could just use my brush and change the mode to clear and just essentially erase this away. So to keep it slightly less destructive, I'm going to add the mask. Just going to double check that my tool properties, oh, where is it? The pen pressure. It is on. Okay, cool. And I could just start removing this. I'm going to change up my opacity. It was 0.3. So I'm just stamping away. And especially around where the seams are, because I know that's going to be more noticeable. Lower the opacity again. Let's take a look. So I'm pressing 1 on the keyboard, 2, then 3, 4, and 5. So we see the seam. There is the seam. So I'm gonna try and fade away at the seam a bit. It's not really noticeable on the lower bit, so that'll do. That's fine. I'll just double check the top bit. Okay, so this dirt that I've just painted on, it could be used as maybe, so if I put it into the base color of the glass, actually, yeah, this will all go into the base color, but then what I need is this stuff here will be on the transmission as well as these rings. If I put these bits onto separate shaders, that's not much of an issue. If I want it on the same shader, I need to make sure that I have the transmission, so whether or not the glass, basically telling Maya which bits are glass or not. So the bottle bit, that would actually be white in the transmission, and then the rings and the cork, that will be black because there will be zero transmission, and then somewhere slightly in between would be this dirt, probably mostly black, maybe slightly higher than black, so I can copy and paste. So basically we'd want slightly faded dust, so we don't want it to be see-through. So it might not be a pure black, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when that comes up. Okay, so it's not too bad. It's not too bad. So we could probably play with the other channels now. So for the moment, let's say we're happy with that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of these, copy them, and then pop them in the other channel. So I could do layer linking. You can you can link layers together, but it depends how much you want to destroy what you're working with or not. Let's go to the roughness. So as I've been doing this work, Maya in the background is also creating a node graph. Not quite in the same way that I would do it myself, or maybe other people, but once that's loaded in and I go to the node graph, you'll see we have all this fun going on here. And this will be the viewer, yeah, and you can see the shader. And it's made this complete swarm, so all these different changes, and you can see what I've been doing. So it's merging things together so you can see. So if you've thought about using the node graph and you're not sure about jumping into it, then you can always just start in the layers and then take a look at what's produced, because you can relay this out. So if I select all of this and hit L, then it will neaten it up a bit, and then we can actually take a look. So what is Mari doing here? So yeah, you can see where I'm adding these adjustment stacks, applying the cork, and then there's the mask that I painted. So that bit that I was just looking at would have been for this top bit up there. Okay, I'm just gonna go back to perspective, and because I only really care about black and white values in this, I'm just gonna put an adjustment and remove the saturation. So change the saturation to 0, just so I can see what's going on. So if this is for a roughness map, then what we're working with is white will be the value of 1 and black will be a value of 0. So that being said, white is technically on and black we can say is off. So in terms of roughness, that would mean that these black areas at the moment, they would be shiny and then the white bits would be very rough. So we probably need to put a constant value underneath this dirt for the bottle as well. But the reason I didn't put it in the base color is because I know that's going to be powered through the transmission color. So these rings are going to be really shiny, so they won't be that rough. So I'm going to try and essentially color correct them. Let's see if I can just apply an adjustment layer on top and get what I'm looking for. So they're fairly dark grey at the moment, so they're not that light. So let's play with the color, the brightness lookup, and see if we can just make it a bit darker. So these bits that are going inwards, I actually want an inverted version of this. So it might be worth inverting it. Okay. Let's remove that for the moment. So I'm gonna just invert these rings. Where is it? Okay. So as I said before, we're in the roughness channel, so where is white? That's on, so roughness. So if it's pure white, that's pure rough. So that's a very basic way of looking at it. I'm going to pop on a brightness lookup, fiddle with the curves. So those weird splotchy marks, that texture was some sort of bare metal that I found. So what I would like is the bits that are not weird splodgy stains or whatever needs to be darker. So the blacker these areas, then the shinier they're going to be. So I don't necessarily want them pure black. We just want the metallic or the specular to be pushing through that. So we don't necessarily want a complete contrast of black and white. I mean, these dirt bits, that's fine for them to be more pure white because it is dirt. So we've got dirt on what will be some sort of gold, dirty old gold. Okay, that's fine. Let's take a look at the cork. Cork is fairly rough. So let's go into our cork group, and so I probably want to, what do I want to do? Let's invert this again. So add the adjustment layer, invert. And color lookup, brightness lookup. So this can be nearer to white. We don't necessarily need the contrast so much. Cool, I think that's fine. And the dirt on the bottle, so let's go into the bottle. I'll put a constant color underneath. I know in the node graph you can create an actual constant value, so I'm not sure where that is. Oh, it's there, cool. God damn it. So if I put the constant value to 0, so it's on 1, and you can see the result, 1 is white, but this is the roughness, so we want that 0. And then we want these other values to be inverted. So it's the dust. Actually, yeah, if I this constant might need to be on 1, because then I'm going to invert both these layers at the same time. Cool, what have we got? It's not too bad. Okay, I think we can leave that for the moment. So that is the roughness channel we've got. We're going to copy these and pop them into specular area. So this base layer by default is 50% grey. I think I said that in part 1. So it's 0.5 constant. So I'm just dropping this little bit of video in because I realized that my full shading wasn't actually working. Although I was texturing on the different channels, I realized that Mari was not actually displaying the full shader, because a lot of the time I was working with flat and I had a rough idea of how it would look anyway. But when you go to the full, it should be displaying more like this view, and then it's quite useful when you've actually got the, where is it, in the lights, then you've got the environment. And at some point in this video I turned this onto, where is it, it's rotate, animated. So there we go, rotate. Cool, so you can see the reflections better. So this should be more what our actual model looks like, textured.
But we got a similar result in Maya that you'll see towards the end of the video, but I just thought I would drop this in now. And in order to fix that, I'm just going to turn this rotation off because it's quite unnerving. So because this wasn't displaying my full shader, what I did was, even if you're texturing in these channels there, I just open up the node graph, and this is a complete mess. But all you need to care about is just look for these big nodes here, and you want to get your shader. And you can see when you're working in the standard layers way, it basically hooks everything up in this node graph. So in order to display my full shader properly, I pressed F3, which is the shaded view on that side, and then in the node graph I just selected this and pressed 1, and now I can see my actual my model with a more realistic shaded version, because what it was doing before looked a bit more like basic but with a bit of highlight. So that's how you do it anyway. So if you change your model to full and you don't think you're actually getting the roughness channels and bumps being incorporated, then just pop into the node graph, find the principled BRDF shader or whatever shader you've got, this is the default one, and press 1 on that.
Okay, so now we need to add the specular weight. I mean, not specular weight, specular transmission. I haven't actually altered this, have I? So, as I was doing with the roughness, so white, we can imagine white is on and black is off. So now I've copied my version from the roughness into the specular channel. I pretty much need to I'm going to apply an invert across all of these different groups and take a look at the result. So where is it? Invert. Cool. So the white will be the shiniest, and the black or greys will be duller. I think that's fine. And we can see that UV tile, but luckily that's on the bottom, so we can kind of ignore that. And transmission weight. I think for this area, I'm just gonna block out my own thing. So I'm just gonna drop some colors down. So I need the selection tool, so that's patch selection. So I've got this area, and this area will be, so this will be the white. Yeah, so yeah, I was just thinking about in the other layer, I need to copy and paste across. So I think there's a fill layer in one of these. Whoops, that was the mask. So I can just remove that. So I could just put a color down and put that as white, and then do mask, layer mask, add mask from selection. just rename that white, and then I'll do another color. And let's make this one black. And I'll just select the other patches. And add to the layer mask, add mask from selection. Cool, I'm going to jump back into the specular layer. And so we have this dirt in the bottle group that I made. So maybe I could copy this across. So I might as well just pick that whole thing and chuck it into the channel, the transmission weight channel. Cool. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so I could turn the invert off because we want most of this see-through. So anywhere that is less than white is going to be a bit more see-through. I might want to fade this back a bit. So it's mainly that dust one, or in fact I could add a bit more contrast, so I'm going to drop down a contrast. Because we're using this map to tell Maya what will be on or off, that's why I'm adding a bit more contrast. So the bits that are pure black around here, then they're going to definitely be non-transparent. So the thickest bits of dust, I guess, for these bits. And then all the other bits are going to be somewhere in between. Great. What other channels do I have? So I've got the bump. So I'm going to just see if I can copy across the roughness. Let's take a look at that. So I think we could copy this across to use in the bump channel. So I'm going to select all these layers. It's because we have the dirt, all the things that are rough, we would like, well in this instance, I would like to have a bit of bump. Like the dust maybe, you know, there's the strongest bits are these, are the dirt bits and the cork bits. So the white bits will be raised the most in the bump map. So I'm going to copy that all across and pop it in the bump. I might need to add another channel later down the line, but I'm going to probably export all of this and then take a look in Maya, see where I'm at, because it could be cool to add in some more scratches. But I know Maya has an input in transmission, which is extra roughness, which I've used on glass before. So I could open this back up, create a channel specifically for that. So I'm going to leave this like that. So this is our bump channel now. So I've just copied straight across from the roughness. So I'm going to save this and export. Actually, I've been looking out flat shaded all the time, so I could look at the full shading, go back to my base color. So you can change the environment as well in the lights tab. So we have environment, and in the image they have some built-in environments. So this one looks pretty interesting. In the base color, maybe I should put in the glass color, so I could just quickly drop that in. So I'll just put in a standard color. I think in the reference it was a darker green. So I'm going to go to the browny green bit, pull down the value. Actually, thinking about it, the glass would actually be brighter, but it's more the refraction that is causing the actual look of it. So I guess any color that I put in, I don't necessarily plan on using. You can also put rotation on the environment as well somewhere. So is that animated rotation like this? So I'm going to turn off these other lights as well, just see what it looks like, and pop up the intensity. I don't have an exact direct light. That rotation is pretty distracting. So I'm going to change that back to static. Okay, well, I'm going to jump into Maya and then have a play with that and see how that's
that's looking, because I'll get a better indication, because most of this is actually glass, and at the moment we're not getting that transparency. So I'm just going to jump into mine now. Okay, so for Mari, the export was 16 bits. The channels were all 16-bit, and they had to be EXRs. I didn't realize I had a few issues with exporting. I'm using the non-commercial edition, and when I try to export in PNGs, apparently you can't do it at 16 bits. So yeah, that's fun. So I've exported them to my desktop. Now back in Maya, I'm just going to start plugging all these textures into my bottle shader that I've just created. So the base color. So I saved everything to my desktop. So I'm going to pick the first base color. And where is it? Tiling. So UDIM Mari. And then this is an EXR from God, what am I saying? This is an EXR file format from Mari. Mari was working in linear, so we're going to change this to ACESCG, which is a linear file format. I'm going to change the file name to base color. So now we have that there. And I'm going to go to my roughness, do the same again. So load in the file, locate it, I'll select the first one, and UDIM Mari. So change this to roughness in the name. Color space, we can keep it raw. Can't even talk. Raw will be a linear display. Typically with textures, by default, I think this will be sRGB anyway. And you notice as I plug this in, it goes straight to the alpha looking. Sorry, it goes straight to the alpha. And now because I believe there's an alpha contained within that, but on the export. But if I'm not sure on that, I can always tell Maya to look for float information. So I could just plug in essentially this R channel or any of these channels. So if I plug this in and I render and I notice I'm not getting my roughness, I can give it this color information from the red channel. Let's plug in the next one. So specular weight. So I had a specular channel in Mari. UV tiling to UDIM. Change the file name, specular. Cool, raw should be fine. Transmission. So transmission weight, I'm going to pop in that custom channel that was made. And then we can see the preview there. Change the file name just to keep it neat and tidy. Transmission weight. The last time I was plugging in textures in Arnold, they were from Substance, so I know there's a few settings that can be altered which might not be applicable.
bump map I could put in now, but I'm going to leave it because I also have oh wait, no I don't, not with this. I was thinking of another project that I was working on, but I baked a normal map for this other character I was working with. So there's a cool way you can combine normal and bump maps within Maya. So yeah, we can't do that unfortunately. So I might as well just plug that in now. So go File, search for it. So put it in the bump value. Search for the file. Cool, change the name. Okay. So in the transmission area, now that something's plugged into the weight, I get all these other options. Because when there's no transmission, this is not it's not applicable like the rest of it. So the color of the bottle would be powered through this color. So I could change that to darker green. Shift this out of the way for the moment, and I put in a sky dome. I'm just going to change in my render settings the size of the render. Let's go full HD. Where's my render view? It's hiding. Cool. I didn't actually apply the shader, so I'll select the object, right click, scroll down to add, assign it existing, and the bottle. That's pretty interesting. So I would say we're getting this all black, and that's very likely because of the transmission. So I've paused that render, saved a snapshot. If I look at the map going into the transmission weight, it's searching for an alpha. In hindsight, this is not a 32-bit image. So I'd imagine if I change my out color R, this float value, to go into the transmission weight, that should solve the problem. We should at least see some sort of difference. Look at that, cool. Okay, so that being said, now I would need to change from the alpha to the red channel, because we need that information. Oh, come on. So I'm just going to quickly do that. By default, if you pop in an EXR, Arnold, actually not even just an EXR, I'm pretty sure it's most other formats, Arnold looks in the alpha. But the thing is, you don't necessarily need to use all that, require so much memory, as in, you know, if you've got these 32-bit EXRs, they're going to be bigger in file size. So you could end up with textures that are gigabytes. That's a lot of bump, so I need to change that. So I'm going to go back to the hypershade. Go into the bump and that shader. Where is that? Actually, this bump 2D node. So I'll just change that to 0.3. Not really seeing any transparency, so I need to take a look at that. Unfortunately, I could see that UV was not nicely done as well, so we are getting some distortion there. I feel like I need to make a channel for the metallic, or at least have I need to make a separate channel probably just for this gold. Or I could apply a separate shader to it and then use my specular map in there. I quickly try that now. Oh wait, it's not a separate object. So yeah, I could separate these, or I could create a separate map. I think I could just mesh, separate, and then combine these. Cool, yeah, that's done it. So I'll just assign a new material, Arnold shader, AI standard surface, and the hypershade I could probably just drag and drop. Look at this mess. So I'm going to select those two shaders and I press the in and out connections just to lay them out neater. So with this AI standard surface that I made, I'm just going to call it gold. I could actually change the preset to gold as well. And the metalness you'll see is on 1. So what I could do is I'm going to pop my color in. Without doing anything else, I could see how it looks. But I'm going to drop the roughness in. So I want to go out color R into the specular roughness. And so the specular map I've got, I could actually use that in the metallic. So it's just reading the black and white values. So I'm going to do that in the gold shader, see what happens with that. So that's more interesting. I'd say that's compared to obviously what we had before. Looks better. I'm just going to zoom in and render that. So we could have gone back into Mari and created a separate metallic channel, but I think just separating those objects into a shader for this, the purpose of this, that looks fine. So I can see the roughness is working, and then I can use a bump map and just give it a bit more detail. You could even use a displacement map if you wanted to go to town on it. So I haven't created a displacement map, but you know, the bump map will do the same thing. So the next thing I will need to take a look at is certainly the glass. We're not getting any of that transmission, which is pretty disappointing. But for the moment, I think that glass is looking not too bad. We can see the roughness map is working with the dirt that was painted in Mari. And yeah, as I just said, everything else looks horrendous. So we will get around to it. So where we left off last time, I have changed a few things. So we had a render that looked, I think that was the last render I did before I stopped recording and sharing for this stream. And in fact, no, we had something different. I think the bump was more extreme because I didn't change that from the default, which I think was a value of 1. Oh yeah, it was more like that. So yeah, this has a separate shader, and we're using the Specular map. Rather than create our own metallic map, we can use the Specular map in there because it was controlling what we want, and this is going to be a really strong gold. So at the moment, at least, I like the look of this gold, the rings. So we have the bump map. Actually, do we have the bump map on that one? So that's a good point. I should probably check that. But anyway, so during the break, I changed the color of the transmission, and I also turned on Opaque. Sorry, turned it off. In Arnold, when Maya changed from mental ray to Arnold, there were a bunch of things that you had to do differently. So on every piece of geometry that you click on, in the shape tab, so the polygon object, you have these settings down here. So this Arnold tab. So if you want something to be glass, then you need to turn off this opaque option here. Otherwise, it will assume that no rays can go through. So that's something to be aware of. And the color of the object, so on the shader, I'll just click on this, the object, go to the shader. So the color of the transmission is actually quite a bright green. So we've got this limey green, and it looks darker because what is happening is this is on the initial layer, and then as the light gets refracted through, then it darkens as it's scattering through. Because we do have thickness on this, so if you think about it, it's hitting the surface, refracting a bit, traveling through the empty space, then hitting the other side, which again has 2 layers. So it's going through quite a lot. So if we wanted this to be a lighter shade of green, we would probably have to bring this up further. And don't forget that the map for transmission that we actually put onto this, it was not pure black and white between this dusty stuff here. You know, we had some grey values and stuff, so we could increase the contrast. This texture size is quite low res. This texture that's actually put on there is not that high res. So we could look at re-texturing that bit there. But if we put more contrast onto it, then we're going to end up with this you can already see it, this quite harsh look of the dust. But there's already a bit of break up there we can see in the shine, which is not too bad. So I'm rendering now. So if I change this color to be lighter, so it's just rendering through, you'll see the bottle appears to become slightly more transparent. So there are a number of things that we have to factor in about the color. So not only the density of the object, but what is being refracted in the background, because you can see up here at the top, the environment's a bit darker behind this section of the bottle. So we've got these lighter grey rocks around the bottom that are being refracted, and then further up we have these hills and things like that. So it's making the top bit look a bit brown because it's inheriting and multiplying that colour to get that result that we have. We could also look at adding in displacement map into this, so rather than just faking this the bump look, we could in fact plug in the bump into the displacement area of our shader. So if I click on the bottle shader, press in and out connections, I will need to turn on, so this is non-smooth. So if I click on this and go to the shape area of the object, I should probably change the name of this object, so I'll call it bottle. So in the shape area, I should turn on subdivision before I even think about doing any sort of displacement. And then the iterations is the amount of smoothing, essentially. So let's put that on 2. This is very low poly. So scrolling over the surface shader group, so this comes after the shader, so you mess around here, and then there's the shading group. You see we have a displacement material tab. We have a few other, pieces, tabs we can play with. So this bump map that we have, I could just drag and drop that to there. And I'm just going to drag the hypershade to the other side. I'm not changing anything. Let's just see what it does. So we still have bump affecting this. I think this is going to go a bit crazy. Yeah, already you can see so there's a fair amount of information in the bump map, because when we were painting in Mari we were faintly doing it, and so we've got some of that information in the bump map, but it means when it comes to displacement, it's going to look at all those values that are greater than 0, so any values that are not black, and try and push them forward. Sorry, push them outwards. So that looks pretty mental. So before and after. So in the displacement shader node that was created, if we want to alter that, then we could change it from the default of 1 to 0.1 and give that another render. Because there's a lot of faint information within the bump map,
So what I mean by that is the grey, slightly grey values, we are getting this general noise over the bottle. So let's do a before and after. So that's not too bad. Because we are displacing it, we could probably remove the bump. So I'll just screenshot that. And I'll set the bump depth to 0 just to see what it looks like without that included. So this process is more look development. So we've done the texturing and now we're playing around with this. I was expecting a far greater result from the cork at the very top, so it'll probably be worth taking a look at that. I would imagine if we turn on the subdivisions with that, we can get away with pushing that out quite a lot. In fact, I will do that now. If I stop the rendering, so I'll just put on iterations to 2. I'm going to rename this. So that has the bottle shader on it, which has the displacement in. In fact, before I render, I'll get closer to it. So with this piece of geometry, this is a good example of where there are not enough cuts into it because we're getting this stretching going down. So as it's trying to smooth this low poly object, it's also being distorted. So we could add in some more cuts, because if there's only a few edge loops, then as it tries to smooth them, it's trying to like pull the edges closer together pretty much. So we're getting the stretching down there. Doesn't particularly look like there's any displacement going on, but this could be because I've put the scale of the displacement all the way to 0.1. So yeah, oh, there we go. So yeah, because the white values for the bottle are greater, so it means when my displacement is 1, it has such a greater impact in the bottle. So that's what happens when I turn the displacement scale to 1. So it looks quite odd. And that's probably happening based on the geometry again. So let's take a look. Yeah, we've got triangle. Actually, are they even triangles? Or is that an n-gon? No. Okay, that's triangle. So we could do with more cuts into this, because as it's trying to smooth, there's such a void, an empty void here, and the triangles are not so bad, but if they could be closer to the very top, that would be better. Let's see if subdividing it has any greater impact. So I'll go back to the geo shape of this object. I'll put it onto 4. So it's multiplying again. So that's the mess that we had before. I am going to lower the displacement scale. So my hyper shade, I'm go to the displacement shader, and I'll bring the scale to 0.5. And I've saved a screenshot, so I'm going to update full scene. That looks like utter crap. So yeah, in this instance, I don't feel that displacement is necessary or it will be useful. This is a low poly asset. It's being used in the background. So I'm going to go back to my hypershade and remove the displacement map. So I'm just going to delete the displacement map shader node. Just double check that it's been removed from the group at the end. Okay, so now we're back to where we were before. So we've got the two shaders. In the gold shader, I'm just going to check if there was the bump. I didn't actually include any bump in that. So I've got my gold shader and I've selected it in the top bit in the materials, done the in and output connections so it lays it out. And then we've already got the bump map in the scene, so I can go to the textures tab and then I can find it here because I named it. Otherwise you'll end up with files like this. So I've got the bump map 1. By the way, the reason there's a file 1 because this is the HDR that I put in the scene first. So I'll go to the bump map and I will select the gold shader, scroll down to the tab that says geometry, and middle mouse drag and drop into the bump mapping area, and it creates a node down here, and this is where we control it. So I'm going to put this to 0.25, so 1/4 of what it was on, and I'll do a test render of these strips. Don't know if they're smooth here, but I'd prefer it to be done in the the polygon shape tab. You can change this en masse if you go to, I think it's the attribute spreadsheet. Just need to find where my render view has gone. Whoa, that's way too much. Look at that, crazy. So I'm going to reduce that further. So that was 0.25. On my right hand screen you can't see it, but I'm changing the bump depth in my hypershade to 0.1. That still looks really intense, so I'm going to go 0.01. I think I'm going to have to go even lower than that as well. It just means that we have a lot of white values in the bump map. Doesn't look too bad. This texturing here, we should have continued it underneath the bottle, so gone into the UV mode, and where, because actually this mud here has been generated through the AO, so we're using the ambient occlusion as a mask. But after doing that, then we probably should have manually painted another mask on top of that, gone into the UV view, so painted on what is not visible. This is very, very bright. But you can see everything layered up. So this color is coming from the base color. And then we use the specular map in the metallic input. And then the roughness. So yeah, to get this texture, to recap, it was a what do you call it? A bare metal texture from textures.com, which was pretty much all grey. Overlaid some color, just picked a random yellow and blended it using the color, which I think is the lighten. Maybe it was a color dodge, I can't remember. And what else? Then in the roughness area, we just used some, I think we took the bare metal color into the roughness channel and basically made it so just these little marks on the geometry were the white bits, and everywhere that's shiny was pretty black. So there was a great amount of contrast. That's how we have these really shiny bits and then these darker bits. That's looking pretty good. Let's just let's rotate around a bit and just see how it's looking on the other side. So once you've done a first pass of look dev with an object, you can also do a render a 360 rotate of your object, of the light, or the object, one then the other, or you could do a few frames at different angles, so you can tell whether you're happy or not with the look that's generated. After doing that front render and then the side render, I would say that these gold rings look pretty good. They could maybe have a bit more dirt on them because we're getting this sort of like rusted look. And as I said before, you can see where I've used that mesh map, that baked ambient occlusion there, and you can see where it's not actually that high res, so we're getting these very jagged cuts. So that could be manually painted very quick, so we could do that and then update the map. But then again, we are looking at this asset very close, so in camera it's more likely going to be this sort of distance or further away. So based on the fact it's going to be at that sort of distance, I think, you know, I'm pretty happy with that, and I think we could probably leave that particular asset there. But yeah, once you've I mean, I've just mentioned some of the adjustments that could be made, you know, improving, you know, some of these, fill in those gaps there, and the textures that we used, like this dusty texture, the decal from textures.com, that should have been projected at a smaller size, like if you zoom in when you're texturing in Mari, so in the UV editor. If I was to do that again, I would probably grab, so it was, in fact it was this one, yeah. So this texture here, I think is, oh, it doesn't say the resolution, but I think it's over, technically it's bigger than 1K, but it's not 2K. And based on the projection that has occurred, I probably scaled it up. So I'm scaling up this already fairly low res image. So because it's I think it was 1600 pixels by something. So what I should have done is zoom into the UV a bit and done smaller areas, because our paint buffer, which is basically this area, this invisible glass area that's in front of our workspace in Mari, has a buffer of 4K by default. And you can see this in, where is it? It should be, might be in the shell. No, it's where the brushes are. It's in painting and paint buffer. There we go. Oh, it's actually at 2K. So probably should have upped that as well, but my computer is already running fairly slow, streaming this, recording this, and streaming webcams and all that. So the buffer's at 2K. So based on that, if I don't want to change that, then I could zoom in further to here and then keep this smaller, and that would keep greater detail than it has there. So I could quickly demonstrate that now. So I'll just create a new layer and then I'll hide this dust. Right, and I'll just project that on there. Scribble, scribble. So just for demonstrative purposes, I'll just do a bunch of scribbles, just so you can see that as, right now I'm baking that. So if we look at that, and then I turn on the dust underneath, we can see that the resolution, it's been scaled up, so the projected resolution is a lot lower than what it could have been compared to when I swap it now. You see the resolution there is slightly improved because we're not scaling up this already fairly low image, because there are two things you have to keep in consideration. The buffer, so the invisible glass is set at 2K, so even if you've got a 20K image, that means the maximum projection that you can have is 2K. So you can change it, that's what that option is there for. So I think I'll just double check what you can change it to. So 2K, okay, so up to 4K. And the max export for Mari is 32K. So again, if you think about that, if you set up a document and you decide, okay, this bottle here, so it's 4K, but you want this area to be 32K, Mari will say, that's fine. But if you were downloading textures like this, the free ones from textures.com, and you have a 32K UV slot here, and then you get this image and you just paint, you're like, cool, is that 32K? No, it's not. So it'll project at 2K, but then this image here is not even 2K. So you're projecting at 2K with an image that's not even 2K. So all these factors need to be taken in. So consider, if you've got a smaller texture, just get closer to your model and turn up the paint buffer. size unless your computer cannot take it. So I'll delete that layer. But you know, that was a pretty quick asset, and I think that's fine for the moment. So that has the displacement on. We had the rings, so we've got two shaders. And I think the final result for a background asset in this project would be pretty fine. Let's do one final render before we leave that. So yeah, in fact, it's going to be further away than that. So I would say this has been textured at 4K. So got two UDEMs at 4K. So we were working in 4K just for safety, but I would say these you could re-export at a lower resolution, or you could just resize them in Photoshop. You could make like this. It's going to be even further away than that. It's going to be like there. So I would say reduce it to 1K, maybe 1K or 512. You know, see how it looks. Anyway, so I think that's pretty much done. So that was from Mari into Maya with a little bit of look dev.